what I discovered was that typically right in the center of the most intense part of that energy field, and if you just simply notice it, don't try and make it go away or do anything to it, but just simply notice it. What happens is the power of awareness is so limitless that just by noticing it, the energy gradually subsides.
Hello, Tom.
Hi.
So I'm going to share a little bit about how I read into you metaphorically, and then we can talk a little bit about your background. More than 25 years ago, I was working with a young coach, and he guided me through a process that had something to do with resolving some unsavory feelings that I was still carrying around. And I was really blown away by how impactful this technique was. I mean, it was really, for me, it was life-changing. That one moment I had these strong feelings, and the next moment it was as if they disappeared. And I asked this coach, I said, "Hey, wait a minute, where'd you get this technique?" And he was a little bit, I don't know why, but he sort of dodged the question a little bit, and he didn't give me a clear answer about where he learned it. And I started over the years poking around the internet, and eventually found you in San Diego and found out that you were kind of the source of that technique, which
Mm.
I believe you call the in technique. And
Yeah.
so for people's benefit, Tom Stone, amazing coach and teacher. And the other thing I'll mention to people who have been in the coaching world for a long time, is that Thomas Leonard, who was really one of the forefathers of coaching as it's called today, was also a huge fan of your work, right? And
Actually he'd been looking for his own personal coach for about 10 years and hadn't found anybody who he felt was like 10 steps ahead of him.
mm,
And I met him uh, at a presentation that he gave in San Diego to, gosh, it must have been 250 people. He was a good marketer.
yeah,
And I met with him the next day for a couple of hours, and within a week he hired me as his personal coach, which was
fantastic.
now is the coach of the coaches.
Yeah, yeah.
That was quite cool. Yeah, unfortunately, he died just a few months after that, which was really too bad. But
Yeah, it was a shame. I mean, he developed Coach U and Coachville, and
right.
just he was somebody who was creating things in the world. And but I'm glad that he found out about your work. Somehow I think that's how it made it back to me, was through one of his students.
That's
Um,
very likely because after he passed away, he left Coachville to a guy named Dave Buck.
yes.
And Dave had me teach with him my stuff. And we
Hmm,
taught in San Diego, we taught in Chicago, New York, London, taught all over the place to pretty large audiences because, Thomas had a pretty big mailing list. So that worked
yeah.
out well. That worked out,
So
kind of launched me into an instant fame within the coaching world.
so I'm kind of curious, to frame this conversation, I'd love to hear a bit about your background and how you developed this material, and
Sure.
then we'll talk about what you're up to now.
Terrific. So I started practicing transcendental meditation as taught by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi when
Hmm,
I was like 19,
hmm,
and that's a while back.
a couple years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of years ago. And I remember walking down the street after learning meditation, and I just thought, I gotta learn how to teach other people how to do this.
Hmm,
So by the time I was 22, I'd gone to a teacher training course and learned how to teach TM.
hmm,
And I taught several hundred people and was cruising along like that. And then a very interesting thing happened in 1993. I was uh, I was living in Fairfield, Iowa, which was the home of Maharishi International University
hmm.
and the campus there. And one night, there was some stranger at my front door, and I went there, and the guy pulled out a 44 caliber handgun and shot me in the chest.
Wow.
And the 44 bullet is, like big. Hunters use them for killing bears. So it's no
mm,
small miracle that this didn't kill me.
mm,
So I had two surgeries, one in the front because the bullet hit me kind of next to the right nipple,
mm,
and it ricocheted off a rib and went down and lodged behind my fifth lumbar. But the biggest part of the healing that I needed was from the PTSD that resulted from that attack. And
mm,
so I didn't believe the psychological dogma that PTSD is incurable. I thought, they must be missing something.
mm,
So I started to do my own private research, and I discovered a way to get the distinction between the content and the energy of the emotion. All emotions have both things. They have what it's about, the events that
mhm,
occurred, and it has the energy, which is, turns out that the problem and the solution really lie on the energy side, not the cognitive side. So the
mm,
whole field of psychology, which is emphasizing the psychological side of it, this is why people go to therapists for years and don't solve their problems, is because they're not getting to the real cause of the issue. And the
mm,
real cause of the issue is the unresolved toxic emotions that they're carrying around in their body.
mm,
And that's what I call the pure awareness techniques that I was able to develop. Started off with the in technique, which is a technique for noticing when you have an emotional energy stored in the body that's the result of not finishing some experience that you had. It tends to be like a tight knot or ball of energy that's localized inside someplace, very often in one of the chakras, solar plexus, heart, throat, someplace like that. And so what I discovered was that typically right in the center of the most intense part of that energy field, there's a kind of there's a kind of central intensity there. And if you just simply notice it, don't try and make it go away or do anything to it, but just simply notice it. What happens is the power of awareness is so limitless that just by noticing it, the energy gradually subsides. And so then you kind of click in closer, sort of like you're on Google Maps or something,
mhm,
and focus again on the central strongest part. And if you keep doing that again and again and again, what happens is the energy gradually fades away because you're completing some experience that you couldn't complete right when it happened. So the in technique energies are incomplete, unresolved, toxic, or disruptive emotions. And that was the only technique that I had for quite a few years. But then what happened was I was teaching a class, a teleclass. We didn't have Zoom back then, so I was
right.
teaching a, and I was teaching a teleclass.
Teleseminars.
Yeah, yeah. I was teaching a class to a group of people for what I was calling the core dynamics coaching training, and this was learning how to use the in technique to resolve, these incomplete toxic emotional energies. And this one woman came on a call a little bit late. And when she came on the call, I could tell from her introducing herself that something was off. Something wasn't right. So I asked her about it, and it turned out that she was living with a guy who had a daughter, and the guy had just given his daughter this elaborate birthday party. And a few months earlier, it was her birthday, and there was no elaborate party. So she was pissed at this guy
I bet.
for not giving her something similar to what he gave to his daughter. So that was very interesting. And it was in the process of doing that that I discovered the out technique. And the out technique is quite different than in technique. The energy sort of radiates out from the body and fills up the space around you. And if you go out through that cloud or mist of energy far enough, you get to the outer edge where the energy fades away into the surrounding quietness. And that quietness is your awareness. So when you do the in technique and you resolve those constricted type of energies, at the end of it, the constriction is gone and you're just in the silence of what I call pure awareness. And when you do the out technique, you go out and you go out beyond the,
The upset or yeah.
you go out beyond the radiant energy that's going out from the body. And when you get out beyond it, you're in the silence. And then you go a little deeper into the silence. Then you go really deep into the silence. And what happens is the energy just can't maintain its integrity and it starts to fade away.
One thing I want to say, just, folks that are, my background is in NLP, like I mentioned to you, and
Yeah.
people who are more from a psychotherapeutic background. I believe the way Tom's using the term energy, if you're not somebody who talks about energy, it's really just the emotional feeling that somebody is experiencing. So in my
Yeah, it's
working
the
with Tom,
sensation.
those yeah, the sensation, the literal feeling sensation. So there's no abstract idea here. So I just
Right.
wanted to make sure that was clear for people. So with one thing that I'll say with working with either of these techniques, the in technique or the out technique, it's about taking the literal feeling that you're experiencing somewhere in your body, or sometimes it's funny, people used to look at me like I was crazy as a kid. I experienced feelings on the outside,
Mm-hmm.
and at a
Mm-hmm.
certain point I realized, oh no, that makes sense, because we have a subjective experience of the world, right? We have our map
Yeah,
of the
and
world, and sometimes feelings or energies are experienced on the outside.
yes, and some people have a lot of capacity to sense and feel emotional energies from others in others.
Absolutely.
And some people don't have so much of that. So that capacity varies all over the map. But you're right. Sometimes it's good to be able to make the distinction between your own energies and those of others,
Mm,
because the ones that you have yourself, you have with these what we call pure awareness techniques, we have a way to resolve both the constricted ones and the
mm,
radiant ones.
mm.
Whereas when it's somebody else's feeling, you can't really do anything about that other than guide them to do something similar, because
Yeah,
it's their the sensation is in their body. So even if you feel it as a kind of just consequence because they're feeling it and you have a capacity to feel that, you're feeling it in their body is not going to do anything for them.
got it. Before we move on, I just want to say that the in technique alone has been just a tremendously powerful resource for myself and working with clients. I
Excellent.
think at times it can be challenging with some people. I usually like to coach people on connecting to a centered place first, so that they have a bit of a home base to get back to, because it can be a little bit scary going into
Yes,
unsavory emotions at first, and it feels very
it can be.
counterintuitive, right?
It can be. And it's actually counter conditioning rather than counterintuitive, because
Yes.
the
Okay.
conditioned response with the in technique energies is the conditioned response is to not want to feel it. Hmm. Nobody likes emotional pain.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to learn how to feel it and to do it in such a way that the feeling of it is not really a doing, it's more just like I'm noticing.
Mm.
And if you just simply notice the central strongest part of the in technique energy, it will tend to gradually fade away,
And
which
that's,
is
for me, that's what was so surprising, is that through going through it, I would say I had a couple different experiences. Sometimes it just dissipates. It's almost like
yeah,
the air is let
yeah,
out of a balloon.
yeah,
Um, Sometimes it goes away, but I may need to do it a couple more times over subsequent days.
yeah,
I've
yeah.
had that happen as well. But
The other
it's
resource that as a part of this work is called muscle testing, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And it's a technique of, you can do it just with, one hand with the fingers like that. It's a strong response and a weak response. And this strong response means that you have a kind of coherence with something, kind of like an alignment with something. And the weak response means you're not resonating with that thing. You don't have like a synergy with it. So the muscle testing is such an important element in this work. It's like I muscle test everything. And
Mm.
I also teach people how to do it, and I teach them how to do it reliably because you need that. You gotta have
And,
something that's reliable.
and Tom, is the muscle testing something somebody can do by themselves?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And that's a
Okay.
wonderful thing too, because many types of therapies or coaching or stuff like that, you can't really do on yourself. But when you have the muscle test, you have this wonderful tool to be able to guide the process, guide the path of inquiry, guide
Mm.
the selection of what to do next, and so forth. So it's been one of the most valuable things I've learned in my life. It's incredibly simple, but it's
Mm.
also incredibly valuable. So I
Great.
teach how to do that, and I teach it in such a way that people really get it and get
Mm.
to be able to do it in a very reliable, useful way.
Fantastic. Speaking earlier, you were telling me that now some of the orientation of your work is around relationships. Maybe you can give us a little context around that.
Sure, quite some years back, I was very interested in relationships, and so I created a course called Extraordinary Relationships. And it has 14 different topics to it. The first one is how to get rid of resentments, which pretty much everybody has, whether you're in a relationship or not. If you are, there's very likely some toward the person you're with, and if you're not, then you probably have a backlog of them piled up. And I remember in one of the relationships I had, I used to talk about this topic and say, we have like a resentment pile. Each time you have a resentment, you just plunk another, like, stone on the on the pile.
Yeah.
And what happens is they accumulate. And if you don't know how to resolve them, they'll accumulate and become, like the Great Wall of China between you and your partner.
Mm.
And so it's extremely valuable to learn the pure awareness techniques and how to resolve not only resentments, but I have 14 different topics in that course. It's about staying present, about being able to communicate optimally, about there's one lesson called Stop Dating Your Parents.
Mm. Please.
Because
Yes.
people have a tendency to do that.
Yes.
Trying,
They
they
either
rec-
date their parents or they don't date their parents, right? It's one or the other, but it's a deliberate don't.
yeah. And there's a tendency to attract people who have the qualities of your parents that um, have created unresolved toxic emotions that you need to resolve. And so when you meet somebody who has the potential to resolve that with them, and it's like, oh, wow, this is great. And you think you're in love, but it's not love.
Mm, got it. You're just trying to close out an earlier chapter again and again and
Exactly.
again.
Exactly. And pretty much everybody has that kind of stuff. Back in 93, when I got shot and then had the PTSD, I not only resolved the traumatic energies from the PTSD, but it also led me into insights about this stuff that I'm just talking about. The tricky thing about it, a lot of people have fears of robot apocalypse, robots taking over and killing all the humans and all that. And it's interesting that I believe that that fear is coming from the artificial intelligence programmers who are programming the robots.
Hmm.
And they don't realize that inadvertently they're programming into the robots toxic emotional stresses that are not actually something that we want in humans. And in fact, when you look at the recidivism rate of criminals getting out of prison and then going back, it's very high, very high. And the reason it's high is because the therapies that are done at the prisons, the cognitive therapies, doesn't address the real issue, which is the energy of the toxic emotion. The really big shift with my work is shifting from the content to the energy. It's in the energy. See, if something doesn't have any energy, it's not a problem.
Right.
But the kind of therapies that are done typically in prisons, if there are, if there are any, are typically cognitive, so because we live in a cognitive world. And it's actually very interesting. The reason for that is that when we're little and we get emotionally overwhelmed many, many times, that happens before we develop language. So it's pre-verbal conditioning, right? And because of that, when we have a disruptive emotion that's part of that database of unresolved toxic emotions, what happens is the programmers don't make any distinction between like a useful emotion like love, compassion, joy, stuff like that. But they have a tendency to program in the upsets over unresolved expectations, the projections of possible negative outcomes onto the future. And all of those things don't actually exist out in the real world. They exist in people's minds and bodies.
They're cognitive models. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so this is why, we all know people who've gone to cognitive therapy or something like that for years and still have their problems because they're not getting to the real essence of what's maintaining the problem.
Yeah, and it's, one thing that's tricky with unsavory emotions is that we can keep generating different narratives around those. But if the emotion is there, we'll keep making up new stories or situations to match the emotion.
Right.
So,
Right. And we'll
or
attract people into our life who have those qualities, like I was saying earlier,
yeah,
That's where the
yeah,
that's where the lesson on stop dating your parents comes in.
right, right. For me, what's really powerful here is having such a direct way of impacting or transforming those particular emotions. I will put in the notes here some of the resources, the videos that you have online, around the in technique, the out technique, so people can go pretty far even with that. And then certainly if
There's one course that captures the basics, the essence of the basics. It's called the freedom practice.
the
And it's
freedom
in two parts.
practice.
It's in two parts. There's a freedom practice one, there's no one on it, but there's the freedom practice, which teaches the in technique and also prepares people for how to do that. And then there's freedom practice two, which includes the out technique, the muscle testing, making the muscle testing reliable, and several other things, that combination I've kept at a low cost for people who are interested. And it's available in the top level menu on my website. Inner Greatness Global is the website.
Okay,
Inner
inner
Greatness Global.
greatness. And I'll put it in the video, in the description of the video, so people can access that. And some of the videos that Tom has on YouTube, so that people can, it walks you through the process so you can get an experience of it. You don't have to spend money. Then you may want to go ahead and take another class, because it's really, really powerful work. And so I want to say thank you for that, because it's had such a huge impact in my life, and
Oh, that's
it's a
great. I'm
treat.
so glad. That's exactly my intention. My purpose is to remove the pain of the world and help people to manifest the full expression of their inner greatness.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure.